Welcome to the IT Matters podcast, hosted by Opkalla. We're an IT advisory firm that makes technology easy for your business. Our vendor-neutral technology advisors work directly with your team to assess technology needs and procure the best IT solutions for your organization. On this podcast, expect high-level expertise from our hosts, plus experience-driven perspective from the leading experts on topics like AI, cybersecurity, industry-focused IT solutions, strategy, and more. Now, let's get into today's discussion on what matters in IT.
Welcome all to the IT Matters podcast. Again, I'm your host, Aaron Bach, and we've got an exciting episode early in 2026. Thank you guys for listening, and we've got an exciting year ahead. Today, we're joined by the Vice President of Architecture for Opkalla, Jeff Garrett, and we are excited to have him. We will be talking today about what we saw as a company in 2025 and some of our thoughts, maybe some hot takes for 2026 between myself and Jeff. And so we are excited to do this. We have the pleasure of talking to a lot of people in the IT space, business leaders, and we feel that we should share this with you. So welcome to the show, Jeff. How you doing?
Doing great. Excited to be on my first time on the IT Matters podcast. So I'm excited to kick off 2026 by doing this.
We are excited to have you. It would not be the beginning of the year if I didn't ask you, how was your holidays with you and your family?
Holidays were good. I think I had a solid, we'll call it 8 days of being able to unplug, which is unique. So I enjoyed that, and then right back into it this week. So it's been a hot start to 2026 already.
It has been, and I agree, and that's good. I hope for the listeners out there that you all had a great holiday season. Like Jeff said, this is the first time I can remember in a while where we actually didn't go back until a Monday, like the 5th, and so this first week back has been a long week, and usually it's a half week or it's a cut week or whatever, so it's definitely been busy coming back, but I'm glad you and your family had a good holiday. So Jeff, I know you, especially you and your team, you guys you talk to a lot of our customers. I know we did over 1,250 evaluations last year, maybe more than that. And so, today I think, what we want to cover and want to hear your perspective, your team's perspective, and anything else that, you want to share. We're going to talk about 2025. So, what are some of the trends we saw? What are some of the interesting, observations that you and your team made? What are some of the things we feel people are struggling with? What are some of the exciting things? And then we'll kind of talk about 2026. So, I guess let's start with you. From a 2025 perspective, if you look back January 1, 2025, you're running our solutions architecture team, which is really advising customers on how to do technology, what's the best way to do it, what are gotchas, et cetera. What do you feel like changed the most for it from an IT perspective in 2025 for either the IT department or a business leader?
Yeah, I think something that was interesting a couple of things that were interesting across 2025. I think this is something we've said a lot over the last, I would say, maybe 5 years or so, but I think we're really starting to see it take hold this year for a couple of different reasons. Was the IT leaders themselves are being asked to be more responsible for economic outcomes, not just the technical outcomes within their departments. And again, we've said that for a while, but I think we really saw it come to fruition this year in 2025. A lot of that was just comments I think we heard consistently across our calls was, asking about the ROI of things, the how it could economically impact the organization as a whole, how they're impacting the business with what they're doing in IT. And I just heard that a lot this year than I think in years past. So that was certainly something in 2025. And then another thing that seemed to be really big this year, and again, I think proving, going back to the founding of Opkalla and what we want to try to be for customers, and saw this come up a lot, was decision fatigue. I think we saw a lot of decision fatigue, a lot of that coming from overlapping technologies, and cybersecurity driving a lot of that. And you see a lot of tool sets because of consolidations, having overlapping features. And so we got into a lot of evaluations of, do I use the tools I already have? Do I look at new tools? Do I completely replace tools to go with bigger tools that have everything? And it seemed like IT departments, IT leaders, businesses as a whole were getting themselves into a lot of decision fatigue instead of, solving core problems. It was more about, which decision do I make related to this problem? So those are a couple, I think, big things that stood out to me for how teams and leaders were having to think different in 2025.
Yeah, and I agree, and I kind of speak from my role as the CEO of Opkalla and talking to fellow business leaders. I think you mentioned decision fatigue and just it feels like when the start of the internet or kind of before the .com bubble, everyone needed to have a strategy for their internet strategy. We're going to get into the hot technology topics for 25 and 6. Like we'd be remiss and we're not really even an IT podcast if we don't talk about AI within the first 5 minutes. So, obviously AI is a topic that everyone is talking about, and rightfully so. It's moving fast. It's creating this future of, where is my industry? Where's my job? Do I need to have an AI strategy? So it feels very similar to before.com. From my perspective, I think AI is moving from, hey, it's a nice, kind of concept to like, we're actually implementing it. And I think, 26 we'll get to that, but I think you're going to see more actual metrics put around like, okay, we're saying we're putting an AI, or how are we doing it? And then I think people, decision fatigue wise from a business perspective, are tired because there's just so many new solutions out there, AI and agentic AI and Gen AI and this and that. And I know your team hears it all the time. So like, before we dive in on like technology categories and stuff, like what's your take on AI at this point and where we're at?
I mean, it's the wild, wild west a little bit right now. I mean, it's, how I think 3 years ago and how we joked about cybersecurity, and there was a new cybersecurity or 5 new cybersecurity vendors every day that were spinning up. Everything is AI. Everyone's got an AI platform. Everyone's developing AI. It's 5 guys in a basement at college have developed an AI tool, and everybody's jumping on board for it. And I think we'll see it go through some of those same peaks and valleys that we've seen other technologies go through, where there's going to be a lot of spread, and then there's going to be consolidation, and then there's going to be a lot of spread into. I think you saw that with generative AI. You're going to see it with agentic AI. There's going to be a lot of things that come into the market quoting agentic AI, and I think where most people are going to end up consuming those in the long run is going to be once they have been consolidated into mainstream product sets. But it feels a little bit like the wild, wild west of, you can't turn around without hearing AI enabled or AI driven something nowadays.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So on that topic, and maybe it is something with AI, but for 2025, across our customers and just general conversations you're hearing from peers and in the space, what technology category surprised you the most this year, either in adoption or demand, and maybe not surprised you, but what technology category you feel like in 2025 was popular that excites you? Either one.
I think as crazy as it is, right? And you said it, like you can't talk about IT now without talking about AI. I think that is exciting. So from the standpoint of what's going on, that's the exciting portion of IT. That in what's going on in our market is how that is fundamentally changing things. I think there's obviously scary pieces of that too, but I think the exciting piece of that is the potential it has to make to create better productivity for businesses, for people in businesses. I think once people get over, and you see this, we see this a lot when we talk to our customers, and one of the things we ask them when we talk about AI is, how is it going in the business for accepting AI and your people accepting it? And I think there's a lot of fear from people right now that AI is there to replace them. And I think what's going to happen in a lot of organizations is there'll be some optimization, but I think we'll go more toward expanding in the future intelligently for their business, but also it's going to be a lot about making people more productive, right? I mean, one of those areas that I think was kind of it was a surprise, but not really a surprise, but a surprise in a different way, was like the Microsoft conversations and how many people were really diving into Copilot and what Copilot is had to offer as an easy on ramp, and that all of that was around employee productivity and trying to make employees more productive in their day to day, not necessarily trying to get rid of employees and downsize.
Yeah, and I think, again, we could talk about AI for a whole podcast, so I'm going to spare the listeners and just spare ourselves since we talk about this so much. But, before I talk to you about challenges you saw in 25, I mean, for me, one of the things I see across Opkalla, and I hear this from other folks that we don't work with or other peers in the industry, I think one of the biggest challenges right now is that, like a cloud strategy maybe 7 years ago, or the internet strategy I mentioned, I think people are going to conferences, business leaders, C-suite, board members, and they're coming back and they're saying, we need to have AI in organization. And so, some people obviously are more advanced than others. And so we have customers all across the board. Some have very specific use cases and they know what they could put AI on. But we have some people who, and I can recall one specifically where I know we've talked about it before, but this person came to us and said, hey, we need an AI strategy. And it's like, okay, great. Like, you want me to give you, 1, 2, or 3 SKUs of AI? Like, and I think people sort of, we're seeing this challenge of like, well, we need AI now. But I think the challenge is that it's requiring, you mentioned it, like it's requiring the business and IT to be more aligned. And so if you ask me what's a trend in 25, I think that AI is kind of forcing an IT department, a business, to actually get aligned and figure out like, what are we trying to do? Because you can't really go have an AI strategy if you don't know what business case you're solving and how you're going to do it. And so, I think it's an opportunity because you can get more aligned and you can be on the same page and people understand each other more. But I also think it's a key challenge. And so I would ask you the same thing, like, but maybe you agree with that and that's the biggest challenge, but what are some of the other challenges that you saw in 25 that customers are asking Opkalla about, or just in general that you hear, whether they're asking or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a challenge. I think that's a challenge that maybe organizations don't realize they have yet. But I think it's why a lot of what we're doing at Opkalla, and specifically on the Opkalla architecture team, around talk tracks we're developing, strategy workshops we're developing. We have larger technology strategy workshops, not just particular to AI, but to the whole conversation, because there's the idea of you need to bring in the business. I mean, not in a lot of cases, you need to make sure you're getting through silos of the IT department first, and then getting through the silos outside of the IT department. Because there's still, we still run into a lot of silos in the IT department. There's still some of the old battles of, the security guys versus the infrastructure guys versus the developers. And, while DevOps and DevSecOps and all these, buzzwords have been around, not everybody has implemented those, and not everybody has coordination across departments. So there's still a lot of, I think, breaking down of walls between different groups within IT and across the business to have those conversations. I think, some of this too that was a challenge, maybe felt a little bit different in 2025, was when we got into these conversations. I think there was a lot more of the from organizations coming to us, not saying, hey, help me with this particular project. I think there was a lot of, what do we do? Right. And some of that was driven by AI. Some of that was driven by probably another topic we can't talk about IT without mentioning now, is the name Broadcom and what they've done. Those are two big things. But I think there was some things going on in the industry that were causing shifts customers weren't expecting for. And so all of a sudden, the plans they had laid out, kind of got thrown overboard. And now you have to come in, and we had a lot of those type of conversations of, we're not sure what to do. And that was an interesting thing to see in 2025. And I think an interesting challenge that a lot of businesses faced is getting that thrown at them in the in the middle of their year, in the middle of their plans, when they thought they had it all mapped out correctly. An external factor like a Broadcom changing completely how we do a core offering like VMware, it just completely flipped these businesses upside down with what they had to plan for and adapt to.
Yeah, and for the listeners, if you're not familiar with what Jeff's talking about with Broadcom, VMware was acquired by Broadcom in a couple years ago, but last year they made a drastic change where they reduced the number of total customers that they really want to deal with, and they reduced the number of partners. And by doing that, which increased stock and made them look good on the financials, they have, if you are mid-market or small enterprise, and even some of the enterprises, you're facing massive increases on your renewal. We've heard 5, 6, 7, 10x on a renewal, and so it's forcing customers to, decide: are we really going to use VMware in the future for our infrastructure? Or are we going to refactor and repurpose and go to a new solution or go to the cloud, et cetera? So I do think that that's a challenge. Non-specific to IT, I think in 2026, you could see other providers look at that and say, is that a strategy we want to take on? Before we go on to 26, I know we talk a lot about cybersecurity, and I feel like cybersecurity was like this hot topic from maybe 2021 to 24, and then it kind of got second bested and second childed to AI by a long shot. What about cybersecurity? Like, what are people asking about now with cybersecurity compared to what they did before, and challenges or opportunities, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, in cybersecurity, something we saw in 2025, something that came to us a lot, was a very repeated conversation, was kind of that next evolution of MDR. We saw a lot of conversations where I think customers are probably on their second, maybe even third purchase of a managed detection and response platform, and that market has changed a lot. There's been a lot of consolidation. There's been a lot of your core players in the market have expanded their offerings. So from where we came, let's say maybe the first boom of that with 2016, 2017 timeframe, when that really started catching on, to where we are now, organizations have matured and their understanding of MDR and where it fits. And so I think we saw a lot of those conversations come up repeatedly through 2025. And I think we'll continue to see some things around MDR in 2026 and how that changes, continues to change. But that was something we saw in cyber was that kind of new, mature talking part of managed security, managed detection and response. How do I handle this within my environment, knowing a little bit more about the topic now with these platforms that are maturing?
Yeah. I think, managed detection response is certainly still an important solution and service that many companies, it makes financial sense to do. I think, the observation I would make is that a couple years ago, it felt like you just buy the next best thing that's coming up. I'm hearing more CFOs and CIOs pushing towards maybe more of a platform approach, or can we get the best of vendors and solutions in certain situations that can cover multiple things. I think that's what we're seeing a little bit in the MDR space as well. Like, we want someone that is not just the next best thing. We want someone that's here to stay, that's consistent, that will allow us to follow a process. You're shaking your head, so I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly right. I mean, I think it could be wrong, but I think gone are the days in cybersecurity now of like the pop-up vendors that become that jump into these organizations and get bought. People are looking for that stability. I think we see that it kind of goes to, this is not all cyber, but something else. Another conversation we saw a lot in 2025 with our customers is Microsoft, and there was a lot of conversation, and we did a lot of work with customers around optimization of Microsoft in their licensing stack. But most of the time, those conversations came down to the cyber platforms within Microsoft and the other tooling within Microsoft, like Intune, like Teams, and communication platform, using that as a communication platform, using the cybersecurity tools. And that's back to your point, I think, Aaron, of organizations looking for a consolidated platform. that they feel like is stable, rather than one-off products to come in and serve one particular niche need.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. The last thing I would mention on technology trends that I think, I'm curious what you and your team are hearing, but I feel like, because of, if we go back a little bit in our conversation, AI, because it is such a hot topic, I think, yes, there are people on all different spectrums and levels of like where their AI strategy is, and if they can really implement it. I do think it's forcing businesses to really address, like, do we have quality data? Do we have a plan for our data? And so, even within, Opkalla, we're 50 employees plus at this point, so we're still fairly small, but like, even with our reporting and our data, when we look at our information, it's becoming more and more important for us to have a single source, or a source of data that we know, we trust, and we know is legitimate. Because if we're going to use AI in the future, or we're going to make decisions off those data sets, we need to make sure they're accurate. So just curious, like, what are the conversations that people are having with us, and what are you hearing around the data conversation in 25?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably heard the term fabric more in the last 6 months than in the last year and a half, for sure. That the data lake, the new thing is the data lake house. These, where do we put our data? Where is our data? Is our data ready? And so, some organizations, I think, have thought about that. I think that's something, maybe getting a little bit ahead when we think about 2026, is probably thinking more about that AI strategy. Is that even if you're doing productized offerings, you still need to think about where ultimately this data, right? My data's never been further stretched out from the center of our organization than it is now. We have SaaS-based applications everywhere. We have, applications are AWS and Azure, these public hyperscalers. We still have stuff on-prem. Data's everywhere. And I think that's going to be one of those hurdles that a lot of organizations find unintentionally, is when they try to do AI and they haven't really thought about data centralization, a data lake house, how we pull this in and structure it correctly to be used by AI, that you might get a lot of incorrect information out of your first AI initiative in-house, as you're trying to get the data right and massage your data to actually give you what you need.
Yeah. I agree. And I think, but I do think that one of the, and again, I keep referencing, we're going to go to 26. I promise, folks, we will go to 26. But I do think it's important to talk about, where we're at in 25. I think one of the interesting things which is happening right now, maybe it's forced by the AI conversation, or maybe it's just we've been maturing in IT and having IT and the business kind of align more and more. Data is a perfect example where you have to have alignment between the two departments. And I think, a successful IT department, they support the business, they understand the business, they work with the business, and they're producing data. I think something that's going to happen and is happening now in 25, if we talk about how are IT people and how are IT departments doing and being measured, I think that this is one of the first times where you can truly say, look at the automation, look at how much data we're pulling in the shorter amount of time, and look at the time savings we're creating for the business. I think that it's a cool opportunity in IT right now to produce true business ROI. And so, I at least see more leaders talking about, praising their IT teams and their technology teams, because they're improving the speed at which they can go to market. They're improving this decision-making speed. You were in the IT before, you talked to a lot of IT departments. Like, what do you think that, how's the business looking at IT leaders now in 2025 and going into 26? Like, how are they measuring them? What's changing? Like, where do you feel like, if you're talking to an IT director, like, how do you feel they're being measured these days?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably told the story too many times now, but it's going back to when I started in IT, and IT was it was the knob turners, the button pushers, like that was the go rack the servers, manage the data center, look at the eyes on glass, watch all the performance, make sure that product is shipping, those type of things. And it was viewed mainly as a cost center, and how can we run as lean as possible and still get this out, and kind of a necessary evil. Some of us have been told that at times in our IT career by people we report up through, that's what IT was. And that's hasn't that I'm sure that hasn't changed for everybody. And there's probably some people listening who would say that, yeah, that's still the case. But I think for the most part, right, it's IT's sitting at the decision table of the organization now. Right? IT is that strategic initiative. IT is trying to find more efficient ways to do things so that they can take the people that we used to say were the button pushers and knob turners, because they need to be looking strategically at what's going on within the environment, and helping drive innovation forward in these businesses, because it is, to kind of use maybe a little bit of a cliche saying and a buzzword, we are in a digital age, and everything is being driven. And talk about the generations that are coming along that are driven by smartphones and apps on the smartphones, and everything's at the touch of a finger. Because of that, IT and the value they bring and the data they bring has never been more important. And to your point, I think we probably hear the phrase, well, what the data is saying, more so now than we ever have before.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's helping people, again, I think it's forcing people to question, do we have good data, work together instead of work in silos. And so, yes, there's still silos and not everyone's perfect, but I think it is getting better. So, all right, well, let's move on kind of to 2026 now. We've started with a very busy first week, and busier than I expected, at least. And so, I think let's kind of, you're a CIO, you're sitting across from you in the Opkalla solution architecture team, and you're planning your 2026 roadmap. What are you all talking to CIOs, directors, CISOs, et cetera? What are you talking to them about? What should they prioritize? What do you think they need to care about going into 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one, and again, we'll harp on it a little bit longer, and then we'll talk about some other things, but AI strategy, right? And really looking at AI strategy. And we've already had, I had 3 conversations this week alone, just through our AI talk track, starting off the year of 2026 of looking at that strategy. And we've kind of come into this, and we talk about it, the phases, and try to help our customers figure out where they are in the phase, what's missing from that. And it covers a lot of areas. It goes back to what you were talking about with, do we have a centralized data location, a centralized data lakehouse determined? Do we have the appropriate, even going back to like the pre-work of, do we have guardrails in place? Do we have proper governance in place? Do we have the right security tooling in place? I think a lot of people are trying to get into the operationalization of things and find those good product wins. That's where Copilot comes in. That's where a lot of the customer experience, CX side of things comes in, is these productized offerings they can put in quickly, but maybe missing some of the pre-steps. So that's, I think, going to be an important thing that I think shops should look at for 2026 is, let's get that AI strategy in place. So now we're plugging into it rather than trying to go back and change something foundationally after we're already halfway down the path. So I think that AI strategy is a big one.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think a prediction I have, and sure, maybe this is a hot take, but I think that if you fast forward to the end of 2026, so 12/31/2026, and we're having this same conversation about, what happens in 2026, I think you're going to see, a lot of AI implementations and and strategies being executed. I also think you're going to see a lot of failures. I think especially some of these agentic AI solutions that are being purchased and implemented, I think you're going to see a lot of them fail unless there's true data maturity and people actually have a plan and a strategy, to your point, because I think a lot of organizations are pie in the sky, but haven't really thought through the use cases super well. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's sort of like a slowdown in AI. So it's slow down to speed up. You're going to have people taking a step back and saying, hey, what are we spending money on? This agentic thing's not saving the amount of money and time that we thought. So I think you're going to see that. And I agree with you that you got to have a strategy, but I think you're going to see some of the strategies fall apart that haven't been, don't have like a backbone to them on the data side.
Yeah. It's strategies that are built a little bit on sand, right, rather than a firm foundation. And some of that goes back to, I think, that because organizations are pressed to get things done, because similar to the cloud conversation, somebody went somewhere, heard AI, everybody's talking about AI, and that they think they have to get it done, and they have to get it done now.
Yeah.
A couple other things that I think people should be looking at is they may seem like old conversations, but I think in the new light, they need to be considered. I think connectivity advancements, and this is, more so than just what's become the SASE conversation and kind of the buzzword of SASE that we talked about, but it goes out into, it touches a lot of things like SaaS security posture management and AI security posture management. And it's really this new frontier of how expansive our networks really are when you sit down and think about it, my average employee in my organization, what all are they connecting to? Where are they working from? How far outside of our four walls are they? And so I think that's something that needs to be looked at in 2026, is because, with a continued push towards SaaS-based tooling, cloud usage, and just the hybrid way we're going to continue to approach IT and in business going forward, organizations need to think about, are we managing our networks how we used to, or are we managing our networks in this new way, based on how everyone's working? And kind of in that same vein is identity security. I think there's going to be a big push around how are we managing identities now, and it's because it's not saying like we're since 2020 we've been more hybrid. That's driving forward, but with automation becoming huge in environments more so than it's ever been, with AI becoming big, with these tool sets out there, with different SaaS tools out there that are outside our four walls, there's all these non-human identities that are out there. So I think the idea of putting better scoping around identity, lifecycle management around identity, understanding, are you who you say you are within my environment? The true idea of least privilege that we've been talking about for a while, I think really starts to take hold in 2026.
So let me ask you a question around. So I already asked you about, like, if you're sitting in front of a CIO, what are you telling them to prioritize? You just brought up a topic that I think, again, Opkalla at our core, we advise customers, help them build roadmaps. You mentioned a talk track. So for folks that are not familiar, we have these talk tracks or value-added meetings we run where we'll sit down and try to understand our customers' environments and help them plan and strategize and consolidate or digitally transform or whatever the case is. You mentioned we've been talking about AI and data. We've been talking about security, connectivity, et cetera. SaaS, there's all this stuff in IT, right? So say that, let's go a level up, CFO, CEO is asking the IT team, hey, what's our priority? What's our strategy going to 26? Like, what's your advice to these teams on how to prioritize and what's maybe our methodology that we're sharing with customers around like prioritizing these different projects? Because it's hard to do them all at once, but you do have to figure out which one goes first.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we start with in all of these conversations, right? And you mentioned our talk tracks, our workshops, these things that we're trying to do with customers where, I think we're trying to be a little bit different and come in and not have a product conversation, is have the strategy conversations. And pretty much every single one of those strategy conversations with the IT team, or the large organization, starts with what's the business alignment, right? What's the business case? How are we aligning with each other here in the business? What goals are we trying to solve? And I think that's one of those important steps, because once you understand what the business is trying to solve and what's the most impactful things to what the business is trying to do, then you can start looking at your projects and saying, here's the priority we can set, because if I accomplish this, it's going to have the most impact to the business. And I think it's something, I mean, we talk about that even internally to Opkalla, right? Is what are the things that, am I working on something that's going to be impactful, or are we spinning our wheels on something, yes, that's important, but does it carry impactfulness? Is it something that can take a lower priority? And if we did that in the silo of our teams across any organization, then we may say, well, I believe this is the most important thing. But going back to, I think some of that what we talked about earlier is we're breaking down silos, we're talking more as a business, we're strategizing more as a business, understanding what's my business use case, what's the why behind this for the business. Then I can start setting more appropriate, in those projects, setting more appropriate timelines on what's going to have impact. And so that's one of those things I think is core to start with in the conversation is start with the true why to the business, not just to the siloed organization of, wherever you may be working within IT.
Yeah, and we've said this a million times, and I don't want to use a cliche phrase, but like, know your crown jewels, know what's really important to the business. To your point, I think if you can put a dollar amount on things, how important is this to the business, either from an opportunity perspective, a risk perspective, a process time savings and cost savings perspective. I think if you can do that, you can make better decisions. And I know it depends. Every organization is different, so we can't give like a standard answer here. But I do agree, like, it has to start with the business. And again, we're an IT company. We work with IT departments mostly, but it's hard to do if you don't have a business strategy. I would advise all listeners, whether you work with Opkalla or not. One of the things Jeff mentioned earlier in this podcast that I think is really relevant is we're seeing a lot of companies pop up. It's five people in a garage, and they've got this AI SaaS company that looks like it's been around for 20 years. It's branded well. It's got great content. It's got great copyright. It has theoretically a cool product. I would advise anyone who's making decisions for an organization of size, of some maturity, if it's not Opkalla, talk to someone in the space about who they're working with and validate that the providers are who they say they are. I think at 26, I think a trend that we're going to see is you're going to see heavy consolidation because there was a lot of providers that were started last year. There's a lot of money in the private equity space that needs to be deployed, and so you're going to see a lot of acquisitions. And so I think for mid-size enterprises, businesses, organizations of size, and a recommendation and advice that I would give that I would be prioritizing is make sure that you have someone you trust that you can talk to about who you're working with. Third-party risk, have they been around longer than a year? Do they have any kind of security report that you can see? Is there any validity to what they're saying? Do they have references? Just basic things that we've talked about for years and years in IT. It's just more relevant now. So, I guess that would be advice I would give, Jeff. I know one of my favorite things that you share with our team and our customers is, know where the company, the solution started. I'd love for maybe you to share that and reemphasize that, because I think it's even more relevant going into 26. Like, what is the concept of that you advise people on when it comes to solution providers?
Right. So there's so much, again, expansion, consolidation, companies, offer, having new offers day in and day out. A lot of what I've always said is I try to look at what was the foundation of the company, where did they start, and you can go from there. And how did they try to expand? Because if the foundation of an organization was in data center storage, and now they're trying to do MDR, you might say, well, wait a minute, how did they get here? Right now, you start asking questions. How did they get here? Did they try to develop this on their own? Did they expand by acquisition? How did they get here into this new age? And I think it helps it helps begin that inquisitiveness to really seek the truth of what is this organization? How well do they do it? How do they execute on it? It seems that more often than not, those organizations that have a deep foundation in technology that they're not trying to represent now, they've tried to shift maybe too much. you're going to see that play out. And in the same vein, you're going to see organizations who have come along and developed in the right way, maybe into those stacks recently, or organizations who have expanded the right way into some of their core offerings and their core beliefs and their core tenets as an organization, are going to show better, and you're going to see that show better, and you're going to see that align better. And I think it's true. I mean, it's even true to us, right? Is that's the hope for Opkalla, is that people see us is a different way to interact as an advisor today, right, than the traditional reseller they've dealt with in the past. And I think some of those traditional resellers are trying to make that change. But if you look at the foundation of what they were built in, how they operate, vendors they're tied to, those type of things, it makes it hard to shift. And that's why I think we've been successful in this. And that same thing that applies to us applies to almost every organization out there when you look at the foundations.
Yeah, I agree. As we wrap, we got a couple minutes left here. I want to kind of get into your predictions for 2026. So, we talked about AI and what happened in 2025. So kind of, for 2026, how do you expect AI to kind of show up with infrastructure, security, et cetera? And then, what are some of your predictions for IT and business leaders going into 26 that you were talking about that you think are relevant?
I think some of the things for AI, right? Good and the bad. I think we have to keep a close watch, and organizations need to be aware of how AI is impacting infrastructure cost. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about RAM shortages and the pricing of RAM because it's needed in these AIs. So kind of the same thing we saw in graphics cards. It's impacting RAM. Graphics cards may have not had, a shortage of graphics card may have not hit everybody, but a shortage of RAM and pricing on RAM is going to impact a lot more organizations, a lot more data centers. It's going to impact about how we think about infrastructure going forward. The combination of infrastructure costs potentially going up, the actual physical infrastructure, plus changes like VMware pricing. That's going to make cloud workloads look a lot closer in pricing than they have in the past. So I think that's going to change. I think AI is going to have an impact there. I think it's going to have an impact on how we think about security. We've thought a lot about, our data over the last couple of years and where's data going. I think we're going to think about AI or security around our AI. How are we securing our prompts? How are we securing our actual LLMs? It used to be, we worried about SQL injections and somebody attacking our SQL database. We're going to have to worry about the same things with our AI models. And do we have prompt injection, and are people trying to attack our language models and get sensitive information out of our business that way? And then the other thing I think is going to be a little bit more innovative for organizations is thinking about how they privatize AI. I think that's been something that's been there for the higher end, but I think it's becoming more commercial, becoming more productized for mid-enterprise businesses, where they can take the work that other large organizations have done, like Google with Gemini, like ChatGPT, and privatize those models more effectively, more easily than they have been able to in the past, where that's kind of been limited to select enterprise organizations. We're starting to see that productized offering in the AI space. So that's kind of specific to AI.
And then before you go into the other thing, I want to just say one thing on AI. You mentioned like the infrastructure getting more expensive. I think something that I would advise that I think is going to be something that is a decision that people are having to consciously make is the buy versus build concept. Organizations, everyone thinks we all think we're unique. Every company thinks we're so unique that no one's like us. Well, yes, we are, and hopefully we are very differentiated. But when you look at the data side and the architecture, a lot of it's similar. And so, I think something you're going to see is there's been so much money spent on building AI companies in 2024 and 5. And I would advise any CFO, CEO, CIO as well, but like anyone who's looking at the money side, well, we should just build this. It's way cheaper. I would question that, and I would look really hard to see if there's a solution already built, because people have spent millions and billions of dollars getting the hosting, getting the hardware, getting the infrastructure, building the AI models out. If you can use one that's built as a model versus trying to build it yourself, I think that's, there's going to be cases where it does make sense to build it in-house, but I also think there's many cases where people should be looking to buy the model, and it's going to be less expensive.
Yeah, I agree. I've said this a lot over 2025. I would advise anyone, so from real gearheads out there, I would advise anyone who's thinking about in this conversation of build versus buy. I remember the big data craze and how everybody was like, oh, we're going to go build our own Hadoop cluster. We're going to do all this big data analytics. And this turned into Frankenstein projects that never went anywhere, half-baked designs. And what ended up happening is big data analytics was really just kind of productized into some of the SaaS-based applications or the in-house applications that we bought off the shelf and use today. So I think the same thing for most organizations, right? We will have outliers. We always do. But for most organizations, especially in mid-enterprise organizations, they're going to use productized offerings. And that's going to be the most efficient way to do it. Before you don't want to, it may look from a cost perspective, cheap on paper, but the capital of people you sink into it and the man hours you sink into it, I think in the end are going to show that it was really a negative investment to try to build it out yourself.
100% agree. Before we go, last question. I know you talked about AI, and I think you were getting ready to talk about other technologies. Like, what are some of your other predictions for 2026?
I think a couple other things. Well, I will say, so maybe three predictions for 2026. One of them is around AI. I do think, and I'll start with this one because I don't want to end on doom and gloom. I think AI usage will make organizations more vulnerable first. I think that's something to think about and consider. It's kind of going back to cloud, and as cloud became popular and caught on, and more people jumped in the cloud and they're just deploying things. We heard all these stories about publicly facing IP addresses and storage buckets being open and people being able to go in and just pull out sensitive data because it's just somebody's, Glacier storage is wide open on AWS. I think initially the wide adoption of AI will make us more vulnerable. And then we'll have to, make sure we're dealing with that from a security standpoint. So I think that's something we're just ultimately going to face going into 2026. A couple of other things, maybe not so doom and gloom, is FinOps. FinOps is something that's been around. It's not a new topic, but I think it takes a little bit more center stage for some organizations, and maybe organizations who wouldn't have seen themselves worrying about FinOps and cost optimization is because, again, all these changing models of infrastructure prices, by SaaS-based applications, shadow IT and SaaS. Right? FinOps is going to have a wider breadth than just where it started, which was kind of in cloud optimization. It's going to have ramifications across all of IT about how are we optimizing our spend. Again, going back to IT leaders, being asked to have produce economic outcomes for the business. So how are we doing cost savings in that too? So I think FinOps is going to have a wider reach across organization sizes in 2026. And then the last thing, kind of in the cybersecurity world, we talked about MDR. I think the age, as we move into the age of more agentic MDR. I mean, it's just staying ahead of the threat actors and the way they're using. I think we're going to see that cybersecurity landscape and those platforms continue to advance. And so I expect to see a lot of the rise of non-human assisted MDRs in 2026, and that being adopted by organizations.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, Jeff. We're at the end of our time, and thank you for sharing what you and your team have seen in 25 and excited for 2026. For those of you out there, if you are not, if you've never heard of a value-added meeting or talk track that Jeff is referring to, I encourage you to reach out to a technology advisor on our website today, and you can have one of these strategy conversations with your organization with Jeff and his team. So I wish you the best of luck, Jeff, in 2026, you and your team. Thank you for all that you do. And for those of you out there that are interested in having a more detailed strategy conversation, please reach out to us. And thank you for listening to the IT Matters podcast. We wouldn't be where we are without all of you listeners out there today supporting us. So best of luck in 2026, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for listening, and we appreciate you tuning into the IT Matters podcast. For support assessing your technology needs, book a call with one of our technology advisors at opkalla.com. That's opkalla.com. If you found this episode helpful, please share the podcast with someone who would get value from it and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Thank you for listening and have a great day.